Welcome to tonight's live stream. I am going to get started in a minute. I just need to get ready for tonight's show. Yeah, Todd, it's on the East Coast. It's 11:18, and I usually have to start these shows later because there are a lot more people watching other people's streams. Like Organic has a very good one right now, and other people have their streams. So I pushed mine to a later date because that's the only way I could go out here and get started. So on the West Coast, it's just 8 o'clock, but here in New York, it's like 11:18, and a lot of my West Coast viewers and viewers on other parts of the globe, they can't really get to the streams at early. If I do a 10 o'clock one, so I usually do these 11 o'clock ones to accommodate some of my West Coast and some of my viewers in foreign countries. So that's why I started about 11:15 in order to deal with the heavy online traffic, and I also do it to also be able to accommodate all those foreign viewers and viewers on the West Coast. So now that I've let everybody on social media know that the show is going on, I'm going to get right into tonight's topic. Now, tonight's topic is based on a Facebook post I made this week. And this Facebook post was one where I was talking about how Black women in the 80s and the 90s, they seemed to be a bit more softer and feminine than the modern women today. Now, your modern Black woman today is completely different than many of the girls and young women that I grew up with back in the 80s. I just need a minute. It's kind of warm in here. So So back in the 80s, I saw a completely different woman than what a lot of Black men say that they're experiencing today. And I experienced a completely different kind of woman than what you saw today. Because today's modern woman, she just has a completely different look, a completely different personality, and is just completely different than anything I experienced in the 80s growing up. I mean, I look at women from the 80s, and again, they appeared to be a lot more softer and feminine than your modern woman today. And that's very interesting because Black women were coming out of the feminist movement. And as they came out of the feminist movement, you would think that many of those women would be all hard and aggressive. But no, many of the women of the silent generation, most of these women, they seem to be a bit more softer and feminine and more secure in their femininity than your modern woman today. And because they were a lot more softer and feminine, they seem to be able to be a complement to a man back then, more so than the women of today. And it seems like they were more a person who would be more interested in being a partner to a man rather than going out here and being somebody who wants to call herself strong and independent. I mean, back in the early 80s, I really didn't hear too much of that strong and independent stuff in places like the South Bronx. No, you just saw just kind of soft neighborhood girls, the kind of ones you wanted to go out here and get with and talk to. And usually they had a look about them that was just extremely soft and feminine. And again, looked like somebody who a guy wanted to get with and see as a partner in a relationship, or a girl they wanted to go out here and get with and go out here and date. So whenever you saw a lot of women out here, they usually were, again, just very different from what I'm seeing today. I mean, I remember a time when black women were out here, they had their actual natural hair, and that was something that many people we don't ever get to see today. I mean, with most of today's modern women and even some young girls, they don't have their natural hair. No, in most cases, when you look at a modern woman today, her hair is a wig or it's a weave. And she'll say it's her hair because she bought it. But I remember a time when black women and girls had their own hair that basically grew out of their heads, and they knew how to take care of their hair, and they knew how to take care of it by going out here and doing things like washing their hair, combing their hair, and maintaining their hair. I remember a time when sisters used to go out here and they would be able to go out here and take care of their hair with something as simple as shampoo. And they would go out here and they would use things like your Royal Crown hairdressing, as they would go out here and sometimes use things like pressing combs to straighten their hair out in some cases. And that would be enough to be able to put together an attractive hairstyle that they could take care of. I remember back in the day when black girls basically wore their own, washed and maintained their own hair. And these days I'm looking at black women, and it's just quite troubling that I see so many young black girls and young women who don't even know how to do their own hair. And that's quite troubling to me, because what I'm seeing right now are women who are out here dependent on wigs and weaves instead of going out here and taking care of their own natural hair and going out here and making sure that the hair on their scalp is healthy and well maintained, and that they're taking care of the health of their own scalps. Thank you for the super chat, Trout Nar. I really appreciate it. He says, keep up the good work, brother. If you guys want to drop a super chat, you can do so as well. And if you want to drop a cash app, that's also greatly appreciated. That also helps the channel, and it also helps me to continue to make more streams like this. But to get back into this hair point as related to black women, again, back in the 80s, I remember women, again, knowing how to take care of their hair, and they were proud of the hair that they had on their heads, and they took pride in, on the weekends, washing their hair, going out here, getting the Royal Crown hairdressing or the Ultra Sheen with the straightening comb in some cases. And the reason why they would go out here and straighten their hair wasn't because they wanted to be like a white woman. No, a lot of sisters straighten their hair because it was a little easier for them to maintain sometimes, because sometimes when you're doing things like an afro, or you're doing those natural hairstyles like an afro or braids, it gets kind of dusty, and the straightened hair was a little easier to maintain, and it wouldn't get as dusty and get all of the lint in it. So that was one of the reasons why we saw sisters out here and getting the straightening, not just to get on the job, but also because it was a little easier to work with. That's what I saw growing up in the South Bronx. But the whole thing is, you saw sisters taking care of themselves, and them going out here making sure that their hair was on point, making sure that their hygiene was on point. Because whenever I saw black women out here back in the 80s, they didn't really smell all the time. I mean, because sisters was on point with their hygiene, I mean, they were always out here making sure that they stayed clean, because being clean, that left a strong first impression not only on people at work, but it also left a first impression on just going out here. And a lot of women look to reflect positivity in their image. That was something that I saw growing up back in the 80s. Again, a lot of black women, again, they really took pride in their appearance. They took pride, especially in their hair, and they took pride in their clothes. And again, they wanted to have their femininity be extremely distinct. I mean, that was one of the things that we saw back in the 80s and the 90s as related to black women. They were always on point about their appearance. And even the poorest sisters, they may not have had the money, but they always made sure that they were on point, because it didn't really cost that much money. Get yourself a jar of Royal Crown hair dressing, some Ultra Sheen, or even some Vaseline. Sisters would go out here and again make sure their hair was on point, make sure they were making sure that their hair was on theirs, and because they valued their hair. But I compare, sisters in the 80s and the 90s as related to taking care of their hair, and it's like night and day. I mean, when I think about those sisters back then, I mean, they would have their press and curl or their bumper curls on point. And especially on the weekends when you wanted to step out and go somewhere like the movies or go to church, that's when sisters really got themselves together. And again, it wasn't just about getting a man, it was about doing this for themselves, because even though, again, a lot of sisters didn't have much money, they valued themselves and they went out here and wanted to look their best, because they respected themselves, and that's what they wanted to do. So that was something many people don't. When I think about, again, black women from the 80s back in the day, in the 90s, again, that was one of the things that made them appear soft and feminine, was the fact that they took care of their hair. And that was one of the things that made me really think about back in the day how much softer black women were, because yeah, many black women, some of them didn't have the long hair like the white women, but they always made their hair have style, and that was part of what made a lot of sisters soft and feminine and get guys' attention. Another thing that sisters did to get guys' attention, really, they weren't really too focused heavily on the visual, because one of the things sisters did have a lot of was a lot more confidence. That was something that I noticed growing up in the 80s, was a lot of sisters having a lot of confidence. And as they had this confidence, what it did was allow them to radiate a presence. And that presence was one of the things that made sisters like Gil, aka Mama Fanj, is saying, that's what made them very approachable. I mean, when you think about black women in the 80s, they were extremely approachable, and guys wanted to go out here and shoot their shot, because a lot of those girls, they had confidence, they had a strong presence, and they radiated such positive energy that you just wanted to go out here and shoot your shot. I mean, that was one of the things sisters had back then that made them very attractive. And it's one of those things that added to a black woman's softness, was the fact that she just had great internal character, and that internal character radiated this positive energy that made you look at a girl across the room or even on the street and make you want to go up and approach them almost immediately. I mean, that was one of the things that is missing from today's modern woman, who seems to be just extremely hard and aggressive, is that just confidence, that just personality. I mean, this is the kind of thing that made guys sing songs like Bobby Brown talking about the tenderoni. When your Bobby Brown talked about the tenderoni, it was the girl who had that positive energy that made her stand out and made you just want to just go out with this girl. That's something today's modern black woman doesn't have, and it really takes away from her softness that she had back then. I mean, back then you had women who had confidence and presence, and that presence was one of the things that just radiate that she radiated outside that just made her the girl every guy wanted to go out here and get with. I mean, when I think about growing up in the 80s and the 90s, again, it was a completely different type of girl and a woman out there. Again, she had charisma, she had a personality, she had a presence. I mean, she was just downright appealing. And this was one of the things that just made a guy, even if this girl was just wearing, a polo shirt and some jeans and some sneakers, you still just felt her presence. And that was something I saw, again, growing up in the South Bronx and even going to different places like Park West and different schools. I mean, black women and black girls back then, they were not all dolled up like they are today, but they could just go out here and be attractive to a guy just wearing a polo shirt and some jeans and some sneakers, and it was just her that attracted you to her, and you didn't have to go out here and be looking at all of this gallon of makeup, this weave, and all this stuff. I mean, you had a girl with her natural hair, even though it was pressed in some cases, it was still her own hair. You saw her face overall, and she's just wearing jeans and some sneakers and a shirt and that's just enough to go out here and make a guy turn his head. I mean, and if they even got dressed up, it was even more attractive. But in most cases, just everyday looks, and these girls were getting play from guys because they had that confidence, they had that presence, they had that personality, and that's one of the things that I reminisce about as related to black women and girls back in the 80s and the 90s. Black women back then, they had different things that made them attractive, and usually it was more internal than external, and it seemed like mostly the internal character traits. These were the things that drew a guy's present attraction to somebody, and that's something that I see is sadly missing. Now, another thing that I saw back in the 80s that was completely different than today as related to black femininity was that black women didn't wear much makeup, and some didn't even wear makeup at all. I mean, I remember growing up back in the 80s and the 90s, and most black girls and most black women who were like black girls who were teenagers, and most young black women, they did not wear much makeup at all. In addition to their own natural hair, they had their own natural face, and that was something that when you looked at a black woman, you were looking at her as a person, and you saw who she was without this makeup on. And that's something that was extremely special. I think about growing up in the 80s and the 90s is you saw black girls and black women, you didn't see them wearing all of this makeup. No, whenever you saw a black woman, she usually, in most cases, didn't have no makeup on, but you could see her natural beauty back then. And that was one of the things I really appreciate about growing up back in the 80s and seeing just natural black women's faces and natural black female beauty. And that's why a lot of white women were getting mad because the makeup on. I mean, we just saw who she was. Meanwhile, the white girl had to go out here and put on her foundation, her pressed powder, her eyeshadow, her contouring, and all of that stuff to paint up her face. But a sister never really needed to go out here and put no makeup on in order to go out here and just be fly. No, when you had a sister out here, she didn't have no makeup on at all. And she was just, again, being attractive just with her natural face, her natural hair, and just being herself. And this was the thing that upset a lot of the white females because they had to get up in the morning and put on a gallon of makeup in order to be as beautiful as a black woman. But black women back then never really even put on no makeup and would go out here and just be able to just be fly with their presence and their confidence and their personality. And that would be the thing that would be getting brothers to be like, hey, I got to talk to that sister. I got to go, you know, go talk to her. That's what guys used to do back then. I mean, back in the 80s and the 90s, when guys would see a woman, she ain't had no makeup on. She had that just basic press and curl, and she would just be wearing, again, polo shirt and jeans, and sometimes just wearing a blouse back then. And that was something that would just be enough to make guys just look at this woman and be like, hey, this woman is hot. And again, the standards for hotness for Black beauty were not makeup and all that stuff at all. No, it was like it was overall a completely different set of criteria. And what's really sad about Black women is they didn't really see a lot more of the men out here and how they were respecting and admiring them. No, sadly, a lot of Black women, they were caught up in white women instead of appreciating all of the brothers out there who were checking for them and appreciating the natural softness of Black women, the natural femininity of Black women. They didn't really appreciate that brothers. We were appreciating them for who they were, and we were attracted to them as they were. I mean, most brothers out here, when we saw Black women in the 80s and the 90s, we basically were attracted to them based on just what they were presenting, just with their basic natural hair, with no makeup, and just average everyday clothes. I mean, this is what we would do. When we saw natural Black softness, natural Black femininity, that's what drew us in. And we were attracted to that energy that these sisters were radiating. We were attracted to that presence. And this is something, sadly, our sisters wound up walking away from over the last, I say, 25, 30 years. And it just deeply saddens me because when I reminisce about Black women back in the 80s and the 90s and how they could just go out here and just be themselves, and they would just, again, go out here and just be themselves, and they had guys checking for them left and right. I mean, when I think about, growing up and going to high school and not going to college, but going to high school, I mean, most guys, we like most of the Black girls in our neighborhood because they were out here just being themselves. And we didn't really have all that. The sisters didn't have all that makeup on. They didn't have all of this weave, and they didn't have all of these clawed fingernails or all of this stuff. I mean, they just went out here just as they were, and they were going out here and guys were just out here shooting their shot, and girls were out here getting with guys. And it was just very simple and very easy. I mean, if you think about back in the day, I mean, you had your soft, feminine Black woman just with her natural face, her natural hair, and just basic clothes. She was out here getting hollered at by all kinds of guys, and would be going out here, and these guys would be working to get her phone number, and she would have guys just out here just looking to check for her. And this was what happened again back in the 80s and the 90s. Most Black girls, they didn't understand what they had. They didn't understand that Black men were just out here happy with Black women's not only their just natural self, love, which is what they radiated, they were also happy with just them because they saw the content of their character reflected on the outside. Because most Black men, what we saw with Black women back then was the content of their character reflected on the outside. This is like the early and the mid 80s. I mean, if you were there, it was just that natural softness, that natural femininity, that natural, personality. That is what drew brothers in, and that's what got brothers excited to go out here and get with all of the girls in the neighborhood. So, I mean, like Richard was saying right here, yeah, you could just approach a girl and just talk. and everything was cool back then. And that was just the way it was back in the 80s and the early 90s. I remember if a girl just liked you, she just sent out a signal, let you know that she's interested. Y'all just went there, sat there and talking. And if you made a connection, you just gave each other your phone numbers. And it was just very simple back then. And it was just something just people just went out here and did it because the women back then were very soft, they were very feminine, and they were just naturally feminine. And that natural femininity is the thing that made those women attractive. So I think about, those old days back in the 80s and back in the 90s. I mean, women back then were a lot more softer and feminine, and they were just naturally on the inside feminine. And it was, again, that natural femininity that just drew guys in and made that guy say, I want to date that girl. I want to, and eventually, in some cases, say they wanted to marry that girl. Unfortunately, as we came into the late 80s, what we got was the crack epidemic. And I believe the crack epidemic led to a lot of the end of the softness of the sisters, that we saw back in the earlier part of the 80s. Because once your crack epidemic came in, we got a lot of these dope boys coming around, and these dope boys had all this money. And sadly, this is what led to a lot of the hypergamy. And that hypergamy led to, I believe, the decline of the softness and femininity that we saw back in the 80s and part of the 90s. Because what I think happened is some of these women started getting with these pookies. These pookies basically were simps. These dope boys were basically simps. And as they saw this guy with all of this money, instead of these women having that natural softness, they went out here, some of them got with these pookies and these dope dealers. And that's what led to the hurts and the bitterness that took away from Black female soft femininity and led to what we got, I believe, today. Because a lot of those women, as they were getting burnt by the pookies and the ray rays, and these guys basically, they were trying to use their wallets to lead. Instead of them going out here and looking to be men, they were looking to lead with their wallets. They started simping. And this is what led to what we have today with today's modern woman and all of her aggressive and masculine behavior. Because a lot of those women who were softer and feminine, what they did was put their trust in a pookie, put their trust in a dope boy. And a lot of these guys, they either wound up dead or they wound up going to prison. And this is what led to the bitterness of the woman, which has led to the defensiveness, the hardness, and the masculinity. And this also led to them looking to compete with their daughters. And in an effort to go out here and compete with their daughters, this is where we started to see the masculinization of the Black woman. Because as she was out here competing with her daughter, she had to compete for the so-called good man, because a lot of Black women got involved with the pookie, the dope boy, or the gangster. And as he wound up dying in the early to mid 90s or going to prison for extended periods of times under federal drug laws or the three strikes law later in the 90s, this is how we got the modern woman. Because during the crack epidemic, we went from mothers who were teaching their daughters to love their natural hair, love their natural beauty, and go out here without makeup, to Black mothers who were on crack and not teaching their daughters how to take care of their hair. And then we had a lot of Black girls out here as they were getting older. They were looking to go out here and get these weaves, and these weaves were something that really, they were not good for Black girls' hair or Black women's hair, because you're sewing a white woman's hair in your head. And as you're sewing this white woman's hair in your head, what you're doing is putting weight on your scalp. And when you put weight on your scalp, this is what pulls the hair out of a woman's head. And this is why we have women today who have no edges, because the edges of their hairline have been used to anchor in a weave. so that they can go out here and try to appear attractive because they don't know how to do their own hair. And they think that a white woman's hair is more attractive than their own natural hair. And that's one of the sad things that happened in the late 80s and the 90s as related to black female beauty, is that black women stopped learning how to love their own hair and take care of their own hair. That was one of the saddest things that I think about reminiscing about the 80s and remembering again sisters out here taking care of their own hair. Yeah, it wasn't that, it's in most cases it was maybe shoulder length or possibly down their back if they were biracial, but it was styled beautifully and it looked awesome. And the whole thing was, it was their hair. And that was one of the things that I really lament about today's modern woman, how she just thinks sewing hair into her head makes her attractive, but it's not attractive at all. And it's just a sign that a sister can't take care of herself because she doesn't even know how to wash her own hair or take care of her own hair. That was one of the saddest things that I saw with women at the late in the late 80s and early 90s and in the later 90s was that they stopped taking care of their own hair, and we started heading on the road to these weaves. And these weaves, again, they are one of the worst things to ever happen to black women, because a lot of black women, they don't understand that that weave is just like putting another person's hair on your head, and what's under there is not really well maintained. It starts to sweat, it starts to itch, and it starts to sweat and it starts to itch because it's just something that it's not natural at all. I mean, and when I see black women with these weaves, again, it just hurts my heart because that weave, it's not natural, it's not even attractive. And the whole thing is, you're sitting there, you're letting your natural hair sweat out, and in many cases, your natural hair, it possibly is better than that weave. And that natural hair you have, it's just look, it needs to breathe, and it really just it really prevents that hair from really growing and becoming as great as it can. Because I know from experience, and all you have to do is just go out here and wash your hair, and in some cases, you don't even need to put too much heat or anything on it. You just wash it and comb it. I mean, I've been combing my flat tops for over 30 years, and you can keep your hair nice and tight. And a lot of sisters don't know how simple this is because, again, during the crack epidemic, many mothers weren't there to take care of their hair. So a lot of sisters didn't get this passed on like women got passed on in the 80s and part of the early 90s. If they had a grandma, a lot of those women, they didn't get that hair care passed on. So that's where they lost a part of their femininity, because a woman's hair is a part of her natural identity. And when a woman goes out here and takes care of her natural hair, it really shows something about her character. That's something that a lot of girls in the 80s, they learned from their mothers about their hair, that it was, again, something that said that if you took care of your hair, it says you took care of yourself. And if you took care of your body, it also said that you took care of yourself. Because that's another thing I noticed about black girls and black women back in the 80s. In addition to the weave, sisters also knew how to take care of themselves. Yeah, a lot of sisters did like to wear the Reebok freestyles, and they liked to wear the Levi's jeans and sometimes the Ralph Lauren shirts, but they knew how to keep those clothes clean. And they knew you didn't go to school looking raggedy, or you didn't go to work looking raggedy. You oftentimes saw a sister out here when she was all out here going to work or she was going to school. She always made sure her gear was clean. That was something that I also saw as related to sisters back in the 80s and the 90s, because how you took care of yourself sent a message to everybody about what type of woman you were going to be. And again, that's all part of the solace and femininity. And I remember back in the day when it came down to black women, they oftentimes would be out here smelling nice again. And this was just everyday stuff, just putting on the perfume, putting on the powder, and smelling nice, because they wanted to go out here and appear respectable. And this reflected on them. And again, that was all part of the softness and femininity. Sisters looking clean, that was something that that women just did. I mean, they just took care of themselves. And that's what, again, also made guys want to go out here and step to women, was seeing that she was out here looking clean. She was out here all cleaned up and ready to go. And she even looked better when she got dressed up. That was one of the things that was really one of the things that just drew guys to girls back in the 80s. I mean, the regular clothes would be looking so nice. You would be like, oh, I just want to go out with her just like that. But you started seeing women going out here, and when they really got dressed up and they put on their gear for things like a house party or going to a restaurant or just going to the movies to chill, that's when they would really get dressed up. And that's when they would go all out with the hair. They would go all out with their clothes, and they would just really be just looking real fly. And on the weekend, you would just see just with no, they would go and they would just put on, and that was the time they possibly sometimes put on makeup. But when they would put on the makeup, it would not be like what we see today. No, what we would see back then was sometimes a sister would just put on just some lipstick, and that would just be about it. Sometimes they would put on a little eyeshadow here and there, and that's what we would see mostly. We wouldn't be seeing what we see today. I mean, what I see today when I look at these women like your what is it, Megan Thee Stallions and your other women like this. I mean, face with is just caked on makeup and caked on eyeshadow and lashes. You didn't see all of that. I mean, you had a black woman. She had her own natural lashes. She had on her natural, face with just a little bit of eyeshadow here, and the makeup would be to enhance what was already there. And since sisters had their natural beauty, they didn't even need that much of that makeup at all, because what they wanted you to do was see their face, and you already saw the face without makeup. And you didn't really were like out here today where dudes would be freaking out when they see a woman without makeup. I mean, guys would wake up and be like with their girlfriends or their wives, and the girl didn't have makeup on, and it wasn't a problem because she had her natural beauty and her natural presence. And even though she ain't had no makeup on, you were attracted to her because you knew who she was as a person, and that was the thing that drew you in. And D Wood 78 makes a good point. Yeah, you didn't really encounter that many overweight women back in the 80s. Most black women, they really kept their health straight, and they kept their health straight because a lot of times sisters would be out here doing a lot of work when going to jobs and stuff. And they would also, some of them would just be out here walking up and down, and then they would also be eating healthy. I mean, back then in the 80s, we had a lot of women going out here and do some cooking, and that was one of the other things that a lot of women did as related to their natural femininity. You had to have those skills for cooking in the kitchen. I mean, when you had skills for cooking in the kitchen, that was another asset to a guy, having those skills to know how to go out here and work in that kitchen. And that was another thing that just made a girl appealing to a guy, was knowing how to go out here and cook in the kitchen. And that's because a lot of black women back then and black girls, they were very close to their mothers, and they had close relationships to their mothers. And a lot of moms they had no problem sharing with their kids how to cook in the kitchen and how to do their hair. But because we had a lot of women in the crack epidemic fall apart, and then others get caught up in their jobs, you have women going out here knowing how to do their hair or know how to cook, because back in the later 80s, you had a lot of people going out here buying McDonald's, because back in the early 80s and the mid 80s, McDonald's was a treat. That wasn't something you ate every day. No, what you do is you would eat regular food over the course of the week, and then you would have McDonald's on the weekends. There was a weekend treat. That's how it was in the 80s, and that's why we didn't see many overweight black women. because they were not eating all of this processed food or all of this frozen and fast food. I mean, when I was a kid in the 80s, frozen food was a treat. McDonald's was a treat. You ate homemade food, and you enjoyed the homemade food because you were getting it on the regular. That's what we used to get, back in the 80s. And again, sisters kept themselves in shape, and you could just keep yourself in shape, like things like eating right, doing things like going to gym class or drinking some water. These were things that you did to keep your body tight. And that's how a lot of women kept themselves attractive. And they would just go out here again, and they just had that softness, that natural femininity, because they had learned to take care of themselves from their mother, and they learned a lot about femininity and womanhood from their mothers. And that's something that women haven't been in the Black community have learned, because we had a lot of Black women out here, and they just again got caught up because a lot of Black women didn't trust the men in their lives because they got involved with the wrong men, and that led to a breakdown of the family. Then you had the crack epidemic, which broke up a lot of families. And that's how we lost a lot of the softness, a lot of the femininity, a lot of the things that made Black women so fly. We lost a lot of that over the course of the crack epidemic. And that's how we went from these soft, feminine women that every guy wanted to get with to what we have today, which is a pale imitation of what a woman is. And that's what I talk about in the woman crisis, because instead of us having soft, feminine women like we had in the 80s and the 90s, what we got was a much more harder, masculine woman who overcompensates by going out here and putting artificial enhancements on her head, like these weaves and these wigs. And she goes out here and puts on a gallon of makeup. And this overcompensation for things due because she's just emotionally insecure, what this does is makes many Black women look like a caricature of a woman instead of being a natural feminine woman like she was back in the 80s. Now, back in the 80s, we saw natural softness, natural femininity, and that natural just beauty of Black women, and that radiated in things like your Jet Beauty of the Week or even the average sister on the street. I mean, you didn't, again, see any Black woman with a bunch of makeup on. I mean, most women had blank, bare faces, and their blank, bare faces could go out here and again get a guy just smiling, because you would just see her, you wouldn't just see her face, you would see her spirit, you would see her presence, and that would be the thing that would make you just get excited about Black women. And again, a lot of the Black women, they were a lot kinder in some cases, a little bit more flirtatious, a little bit more playful, and that made her more engaging than your women today, where you've got all of this defensiveness, you've got all of this aggression, and you've got all of this bitterness, and you don't have any sort of anything that's complimentary to a man. You don't have anything at all that makes that woman appear to be complimentary to a man. And because she doesn't have any traits that complement a man, like the softness and the femininity to complement the man's hardness and masculinity, that's what makes today's modern Black woman not as attractive as they were in the 80s and the 90s. And it becomes a major turnoff because today's modern woman, she doesn't want to be a companion to a man. She just wants a man to be an object like a doll. And she just wants him to be soft, docile, and submissive. But the only guys out there who are soft like that are your effeminate men and your men who are alphabet. So she's looking for a heterosexual man, but she doesn't have any of the feminine traits that make her a compliment to a man. Worse, she's got this wig on her head that basically looks like it's artificial. She's got this makeup on that makes her face look like plastic, and she just looks like not looking like a natural woman. No, she looks like a Barbie doll, and she's trying to appear like some sort of caricature of a black woman because she wants to think that being looking like a white woman will make her attractive. But the whole thing is she's not looking like a white woman. She's looking like some sort of caricaturized image of a black woman. And that's a major turnoff to most men as they look at today's modern woman. Because when I look at somebody like a Megan Thee Stallion or one of these other celebrities, and I look at how artificial they look, I mean, it's a major turnoff because there's nothing there that says that this woman would be a compliment to me. I can't see her personality. I can't see her presence. I can't feel her energy. I mean, it's just everything is so fake that I don't see anything real. And it just makes me sad because I remember back in the 80s when I could see a real black woman's face and I could see a real black woman's hair. And it just was so beautiful because she loved who she was and she loved who she was. And she went out here and made herself look the best, even though she didn't have a lot of money. I mean, a lot of sisters back in the Bronx, they didn't have, lots of money. A lot of sisters were growing up on welfare like I was. And again, you could work wonders with a pressing comb and some Vaseline or some Afro Sheen or some Royal Crown hairdressing. I mean, that was all that you needed to look fly because the flyness came from within. And because you felt her energy from within, you felt her vibe from within, that's what made that woman attractive to you. And even there were some sisters out here, yeah, they would go out here and do things like maybe a perm or some waves. But the whole thing was you saw her as a person, and that was enough to just make you say, hey, I want to stop and take a minute and talk to her. That was enough right there. And again, that's one of the things that today's modern woman lacks. I mean, her internal energy, she's no longer the soft and feminine sister anymore. And she doesn't understand that she lost that softness and femininity. And sadly, there was two generations that didn't even get taught about the softness and femininity of black women. And I urge those sisters to go out here and look at some ads from the 80s, like I posted as the thumbnail. I mean, when you look at those ads from the 80s, you can just again feel that natural beauty, feel that natural energy. And again, you see the person coming out. And because you see that person coming out, that's what's again making you want be connect with them because you're feeling who they are, not looking at some masks that they're putting on, because that's what I'm seeing with today's modern women from the 21st century is you see like they're wearing some sort of mask as related to this makeup and these weaves or even these lace front wigs. I mean, you don't even see them at all. And they're out here with this fake face on trying to look like a white woman, not understanding that heterosexual black men don't find that attractive at all. And a lot of them sadly believe that they're looking beautiful with this stuff on, but they don't even look like anything at all. They look like a clown in some cases. And they're looking like a clown because they just it just looks like a distorted image of a woman. It doesn't look like a natural image of a woman. And I remember being on Facebook and a brother was posting up a photo of one of these women with a before and after where the sister had no makeup on her face. And the sister was really a beautiful sister. And then they put the makeup on her and she looked completely distorted. And it was really sad because when the sister had her natural face, she possibly would have gotten more attention from guys and she possibly would have been somebody who people would have seen as attractive. And even though she had some like spots on her face and things like that, most brothers didn't care about that back then. I mean, again, if you had that confidence in that personality, you were going to draw the attention of guys, and they were going to want to talk to you, or you were going to get lots of girlfriends because you had something internal that was attractive. And when I looked at that picture on Facebook, it was just really sad because I said to my, when I posted a comment to the picture, I said, back in the 80s and the 90s, this same woman would have gotten a lot of attention just for having that face like that, just natural face. And we don't really get to see natural faces on sisters anymore. No, what we get are just a lot of just this makeup. And again, I've seen women with more makeup on their face than women in the goth subculture. And even the women in the goth subculture don't wear all that makeup. But I see black women wearing all of this makeup, thinking it makes them attractive. But if you just talk to a heterosexual black man like myself, you'll hear from brothers saying, I don't really care about all that makeup. You can just wear your regular face because your regular face is who I see. And I want to look at who you are, and I want to wake up to who you are. I mean, that's always has how it's always been with the brothers. But you have a lot of sisters out here who get a lot of messages because there's no mom there to really teach them to love themselves and love their own natural hair and their own natural face. They think that they have to be like these images of these celebrities. They think they have to be looking like these black movie stars or these black entertainers, not understanding that the average brother out here, we don't really want no movie star. We just want a soft, feminine black woman with her natural hair and her natural beauty to be our girlfriends and our wives and to be a partner to us in a relationship. That's what brothers want as related to black women. But sadly, a lot of sisters, they sit there and they get frustrated and angry because they've learned a lot of misinformation and they've received a big miseducation as related to black men. And because in some cases, they never had a father to go out here and nurture them. And I talk about this in Why 70% of Black Women Are Single and The Woman Crisis, which you can get on Amazon.com by clicking the link in the description box and this link I'm going to post in the chat. So you can get both of those books, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single and The Woman Crisis. And I talk about how a father's role is very important in a young black girl's life, and why 70% of black women are single. And I also talk about why fathers are important in the woman crisis, because having a father there, he nurtures his daughter. He brings masculine energy that makes the girl feel loved. And it's that love that he helps a girl feel that makes her feel emotionally secure. So when she goes out there with her natural face and her natural hair, she's got that confidence and she's out here just being herself and radiating this flyness. And as she radiates the flyness, and that's what makes her appealing to most guys. And again, that's what sisters had back in the 80s and the early 90s that led to a lot of sisters remaining soft and feminine and just being somebody a guy could just go out here and want to check for. And that's why guys were out here checking for girls back in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, you could go to a movie theater and guys would just be, and girls be checking for each other. We go to, different places like here in the Bronx, we had the Skate Key and all these other places. I mean, guys would just go out here and they would just go out here and shoot their shot because they just felt like, hey, this is it. I mean, if I want to go get with this girl, I'm going to go talk to her. And they just had that confidence to go out here and do that. And some girls, they would see a guy being just fly as he was, just being himself. And they would go out here and shoot their shot as well and go out here and make their move. And it would just be just people finding each other. There wasn't all of this talk like with your Terry McMillan, I can't find no man. Ain't no good men out here. I mean, no, when you had feminine women and masculine men, people were just finding each other. And what we saw with people like your Terry McMillan, they were sitting there talking about they can't find no man. But when you look at the book, you start to see, oh, they picked the wrong people. And that's why they couldn't find anybody. But most folks, again, the sisters had natural hair and their makeup and no makeup, and were finding guys. And some sisters, they were going out here finding guys when they were looking like really like somewhat raggedy. Sometimes they'd have the bun, and they didn't get their hair washed at the time. They didn't go to the hair salon just yet, or they didn't do their hair in the house. But they would still be, getting attraction from guys. So a lot of this talking about can't find no man, it wasn't that way in the 80s or the early 90s. Now people were just finding each other, and they wasn't having no problems because guys would just look at a sister and just see, okay, she's radiating, she's cool, and she's vibing, and I'm getting the energy, I'm feeling the energy. I'm gonna go out here, and after I shoot my shot, we're gonna see where this goes. I mean, that's just how it used to roll back then, because when you have soft feminine women, guys are gonna get that confidence. Even the shyest guy, he's gonna get that confidence to go out here and step up, and he's gonna go out here and grow as a man. You're gonna see guys again going out here. They were getting themselves together. And again, black women were completely different in the 80s and the early 90s when I was a kid and a teenager. I mean, I just noticed again a complete difference as related to women back then. And it's just sad how today's modern market, I mean, we've got all of this technology, but sadly, we lost a lot as related to our sisters. And our sisters, I think, lost their heart and their soul over the last couple of years. Yes, we've got these educated, professional black women who are out here on these corporate jobs, but they sacrificed their softness, they sacrificed their femininity, they sacrificed their confidence, they sacrificed their self-love. And it was really sad to see this, because that's why we've got these caricaturized modern women out here talking about how black men were bad, and that was what we're seeing right now. Todd Muhammad, you make a good point. Yeah, and women didn't. It wasn't their job to find a man. The men would, like you said, the men would just step to the women because they were just, again, they were soft, feminine, friendly, approachable, and the guys would just come up and shoot their shot. That's how it used to roll in the 80s. Guys would just come out here and they would just shoot their shot because they saw her presence, they saw her confidence. And there would be rare occasions where girls would just come up and try to talk to a guy if they thought he was cute. I mean, I ran into that a couple of times. But most times, if a guy saw a girl and he felt her energy and he felt her vibe, yeah, he was going to go out there and step. And many of those girls, again, they weren't wearing no heavy makeup. They weren't wearing any weave. They were wearing their own hair. They had no makeup on. I remember going to high school. Most of the girls, the black girls, had no makeup on. And occasionally they might, if they were going out on Friday night or Saturday night, they would put a little lipstick on. They would go out here and style their hair differently. And they would put on a fancier outfit, but it would still be her. And you would be wanting to get with her because you felt how fly this woman was, and you were looking to have some fun. That was the other thing, was you were looking for somebody you wanted to have some fun with. You wanted to look and have a good time. You wanted to go out here and chill out and relax. But a lot of women today, they don't know how to do that. The modern black woman, she basically thinks she's a man, and she's thinking, oh, that I go out here with a guy and it's like a job interview. She's thinking it's just like the white bosses. She's thinking that she can get with a black man like one of the white bosses, and she's got to talk about her degrees. She's got to talk about her career. And it's a very boring thing to listen to a woman sit there talking about how she's got this degree and all of this stuff. It's like, no, this ain't no job interview. This is just, I just want to just go out here and get to know you. I just want to get to know you and find out what you're like. But a lot of sisters, they never got to cultivate their personality. They never got to cultivate a presence. They never learned how to be, playful or jokey or have a little fun or know how to flirt with guys. They never knew how to just be able to connect with a man. because they learned from their mothers to just be this kind of competitor. And that's what makes a lot of these women today just sound downright hard to be with, because there's nothing there that compliments you. There's nothing there that compliments you as a man. And when you go out with them, it's just like we're looking at another coworker. And again, you don't go and have a relationship with a woman to be with a coworker. You wanted to go out here and have a person who's a compliment to you, somebody who you can relax with, somebody you can spend time with. And sadly, we lost all of that over the course, of the late 80s as the crack epidemic came around, and sisters started break the family started to break up even worse than it did in the 70s. I mean, a lot of our sisters no longer have that femininity, that softness, that softness that complements a man's roughness, because a man is rough and hard, and he doesn't want to come back to rough and hard. And like I've said in The Woman Crisis, if you have a woman who is masculine and has masculine presence and she's with a heterosexual man, that means that that's an alphabet relationship at that point. But that's something that people don't want to talk about, and I can't talk about here because YouTube, they don't really like hearing those kind of things. I mean, Judge Joe Brown has said this, but the whole thing is they don't like hearing it. But again, when I reminisce about Black women and Black girls, they were, again, a lot softer, a lot more feminine. And when you look at ads of Black women from the 80s and the early 90s, you see a completely different sister. And you see this, like I wrote in Spellbound, the Black girl next door who just is somebody who is just somebody you would want to spend time with, somebody who you wouldn't mind sharing and spending time or even introducing to your family. You see that kind of sister, and it just makes you just want to say, hey, I want to spend my life with this woman. I want to build a family with this woman. I mean, we want to get close to this person. That's what we used to get in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, women, again, Black women were so much softer and so much more feminine. I mean, I remember watching another live stream from Mad Voodoo Man, aka the Iceman. He was talking about that because he grew up in the same era too. And again, the sisters were just completely different back then. You didn't need a lot of money in some cases to even go out with a lot of these sisters. I mean, you could just go to a movie in McDonald's and that would be enough. I mean, that was all you needed to do if you had and even if you had like a nice little job, you was cool. You just went out here and you just chilled out. And that's how it was until the dope dealers came in and ruined the game. I mean, when the dope dealers came along, these simps basically ruined the dating game. And they ruined the dating game because they came out here spending lots of money on these women, gassing their heads up, making them egotistical and arrogant. And they ruined the dating game in the Bronx. I can tell you as a fact. I mean, these dope dealers basically with their simping, buying sister sneakers, buying them shearling coats, buying them. I mean, the tricking that these guys did, I mean, it ruined the whole thing. And it led to, again, the end of the softness of the sisters, because as these guys basically failed to meet these women's emotional needs and overcompensated by meeting their financial needs in order to try to get them to, that led to a lot of sisters turning into these predatory women who started looking to get guys to trick on them, and it really, again, ruined everything, because as these women got burnt by these guys and got bitter, they then taught their daughters how to become aggressive and masculine, because there was no father there to nurture their daughters. And that's how we got this harder, more masculine Black woman that a lot of brothers are dealing with today, because we had that crack epidemic basically destroy the entire dating market. But before then, again, it was just, yes, sisters were poor, but they were proud. And because they were poor and proud, they had dignity about themselves. That's why they took care of themselves. That's why they took care of their hair. They took care of their bodies. That's why they took care of their neighborhood. I mean, it was a completely different community. Yes, it had been hit by feminism and the family had been broken by the welfare state to a point, but it was the crack epidemic that basically put the nail in the coffin because it created a civil war in the black community. And part of that civil war was we lost the softness and femininity of our sisters. And it's those hard, angry women who raised all of these masculine, aggressive women that you hear on many of these YouTube platforms talking about how much they have all these issues with black men and how they just are making all sorts of generalized statements. Like when I was watching a Dennis Sperling live stream, and it was troubling to me when I heard that black woman out here talking about how black men were violent, black men were criminals. But what they didn't want, what this black woman didn't want to say was that who associated with those criminals, who associated with those drug dealers, who associated with those gang members. I mean, that's the reason why we have all of this dysfunction, because sisters got caught up in their hypergamy, and that hypergamy had them monkey branching over to the thugs, the Pookies, the Ray Rays, and they basically wound up getting involved with these guys, and then they wound up becoming bitter because they didn't get what they wanted out of the relationship. And sadly, that's how we lost all of the black woman's softness and femininity, because one generation wound up getting burnt because they fell into a rat trap. And once they fell into a rat trap, they wound up getting bitter. And like Todd Muhammad said, some of them, again, they became the man that they don't need and the man that they, but the whole thing is God made the woman to complement the man. And that's what flies over many women's head, because they're sitting there saying they want a good man, but the problem is they like attracted, and the whole thing is you, in order to get a good man, you need to be a good woman. And a good woman for a man is soft and feminine. And sadly, many black women today don't know how to be soft and feminine like their grandmothers knew how to do, because they were never sitting in the home, in the kitchen at the side of their mother, learning how to cook when they were snapping the peas or cutting the greens, or going out here and, learning how to make the fish or learn how to make the different things, like learn how to cook fried chicken. Because I remember back in the day, my sisters used to be in the kitchen with my mother. Even I was in the kitchen with my mother. That's how I learned how to cook. But the whole thing is you learn at the side of your mother how to be a woman. And sadly, many girls never learn that because mom is out here on the job. And she's out here on the job, she's not learning femininity and womanhood at the side of her mother. She's learning from TV. She's learning from the movies. She's learning from the streets. And that's why we've got this hard, masculine black woman who most black men don't find attractive. And sadly, you can't tell her that she's not attractive, because what she wants to do is be this white woman. And in her quest to be like that white woman, sadly, she winds up becoming a caricature of a woman. Now, Patrick Smith talked about E40, the Captain and the song Captain Save 'Em. E40 was a rapper, Matt Torrance, who wrote a song about being a Captain Save 'Em, a guy who puts on a cape to go out here and save single mothers and other predatory females. And that was a classic song. And it was one of those songs that came out in the mid 90s. I think it was 94 it came out. And that's what that song is. So it's on YouTube. You can go check it out, because I know I get a lot of younger viewers who weren't around in the 80s or the 90s, and a lot of them have never experienced a soft black woman or a feminine black woman. I mean, you had to be there to experience it. And I just wanted to talk about it because this was something I experienced, and I was going to just do a whole video on the subject. I may do that video as well, showing you these images of soft, feminine black women, because I hear so much toxicity about black women, and I hear that all the time. I mean, all of this negativity about black women from a lot of bitter guys who have been hurt. And a lot of those guys, they're angry and they're frustrated. And I understand that where their frustration is coming from, but I wanted people to know that there was a time when there were sisters out here, and they had just had their, again, their own hair, they had their own face, and they could just pull dudes. And there was a time when this was going on, because a lot of guys, they just get bitter about these modern black women, but it wasn't like this all the time. And yes, there were some sisters out there that had some attitude, but they, most guys would leave that one alone, because that was just wasn't worth their time. They would just say, okay, she got an attitude, she's got a nasty mouth, I'm just going to leave her alone, and I'm going to go out here and step to the sisters who want to step to me. So that's the way it was in the late 80s and the early 90s. I mean, that's how it was. You know, if somebody wanted to step to you, it was what it was. But the whole thing was is that if you saw this chick with the neck rolling, the eye snapping, the head bobbing, you just avoided that sister, and you just kept it moving, because you understood, okay, there's lots of women out here, and I've got lots of chances, so I'm just going to just take my chances, and possibly with the numbers, I may just find somebody. That's how guys were back then. And we didn't have, well, yes, there was Oprah Winfrey out here with her Miss Andre, but most guys, they would pay that no attention, and most women really didn't pay it too much attention. They were out here, if they saw people, they made a move. They and it was what it was. If it worked, it worked. If it didn't, it didn't. You just, again, you understood that, okay, that's just how it was. You would go meet up, talk, and find out if you were compatible, and if it didn't, it didn't. If it did, it did. And again, when women were soft and feminine, you had an opportunity to make that connection, but it's hard to make that connection these days, because many women went out here and had that, they put up emotional walls, and as they put up the emotional wall, it became impossible to go out here and connect with these women, because when you put up a wall, it's hard for a guy to go out here and connect with you. And since you've got all of this baggage from either dysfunctional family or dysfunctional relationships, what happens is that that man cannot go out here and earn your trust, because you've got this wall up. And that's a big problem with today's modern woman, with her daddy issues, her trust issues, her low self-esteem. I mean, I remember there was a time when sisters did have their self-esteem. I remember when they did have self-worth. I remember when sisters were confident. And I mean, I remember black women when they were, just happy and just smiled all the time. They didn't have this resting, what they call B-word face, which is all frowned up and scowling. I remember when sisters out here and had beautiful smiles, and I even remember sisters who have senses of humor. I mean, there was, again, if you think about black women in the 80s and the 90s, I mean, it was, again, completely different era, and that was very different again. And it was just, I mean, you just, when you saw women, you just had to go out here and make that move, because you just wanted to get with them. I mean, Dark Titan makes a good point. Yeah, Lisa Bonet was the girl next door. She was that image. Bill Cosby was trying to protect her by having her be this girl next door. He had her with the softness and the beauty and the femininity, but she wanted to get white acceptance. And because she was wanting that white acceptance, that's why she wanted to be in the movie Angel Heart. But what she didn't understand was that those white people, they who were making that Angel Heart movie, all they wanted to do was have a black or a biracial sexual fetish. And sadly, Lisa Bonet wound up getting turned out. And that's sadly what happened to a lot of sisters out here. They wanted to go out here and get that white acceptance in some cases, a lot of those sisters who went into corporate America. And that wound up turning a lot of black men off, because as those women came into corporate America, they lost their softness and their femininity as they were competing on these corporate jobs, and they became more masculine. And that also was what happened a lot in the late 80s, in addition to the crack epidemic that destroyed a lot of the black femininity and the softness. But I remember what happened to Lisa Bonet. I remember when she was, because Bill Cosby was crafting a girl next door image for her. He was presenting her as very soft and feminine, as the kind of girl that guys wanted to go out here and date and get with. He knew that that image was very important, because black men are supposed to go out here and be looking at girls out here and wanting to get with them. And when Bill Cosby had her out here, especially when she was like a teenager, she didn't have no makeup on in some of those Cosby Show episodes. And that, again, it just made her attractive to brothers out here. And it happened to a lot of black women out here. You know, they had that softness, that beauty, and we really don't play it up. I mean, when I'm out here, I did a whole video on this years ago. I talked about, you know, the softness of black women. Nobody really talks about it that much. And I would put it in books like I did A Recipe for Success and other books like Spinsterella. I always try to do that. And even in the Thetas, I talk about the softness of black women. But it seems like you've got a lot of black women today. They don't even believe in their own softness and femininity. And it's a really sad thing when I think about it, because I remember a time when sisters actually loved being soft and feminine. And I look at today and you have sisters walking away from their softness and their femininity. And it's sad because, again, as somebody who grew up in the 80s and the 90s and saw soft, feminine black women, beautiful, soft, feminine black women. I mean, I remember a time when guys would just they would be out here, and that was somebody that they would just it would make them just go, wow, this is somebody I got to step to. I mean, I remember, you know, all of that back then. And I just want all of those younger brothers out here who get bombarded with all of this, you know, gender war stuff to understand that there were brothers out here who love black women, and there are still brothers out here who love black women. And what we want them to do is turn away from all of these negative images and stereotypes and start embracing the Most High, embracing their natural femininity, and embracing their natural hair, embracing their faces without makeup, because we want to see you as a person. We want to see you as who you are. We want to see the content of your character reflected in your beauty. We want to see you, black woman. We want to see who you are. I mean, that's what we want as black men. We want to see that soft, natural femininity that I used to see back growing up in the 80s and the 90s. That's what I would want to see, and that's what I try to put, you know, on the covers of many of my books. And one of the things I try to do is just put up stories, because I, again, grew up in a time where black women were just, again, naturally soft, naturally feminine. And I would love to see sisters start going out here and embracing their natural selves. Now, I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. But before I go, I want everybody to head over to the Amazon.com and pick up my latest book, The Woman Crisis. 2022 books like Isis, Legacy, and John Haynes at Death's Door and Eastern Horror of the Hyena Woman. I've got a lot of great positive black fiction on Amazon.com, and I'd love to get some Black Friday sales from all of you, and you know, continue building up the SJS Direct Imprint and going out here and continuing to present more positive images of black women. That's something I want to do with the SJS Direct Imprint in many of my stories, and I want to share those stories with you. So I'm asking everybody to go out here and pick up much of the black fiction, and also pick up The Woman Crisis, which details all of the issues that today's modern women have and why they're so miserable. I really want everybody to pick up this book, and why 70% of black women are single, because one of the reasons why so many black women are single is because they have not embraced their natural femininity. They're not soft, they're not feminine, and sadly, they're not even, you know, what they used to be. So I really want to go out here and thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream, and I hope you'll be there for next week's stream. This was one that I was very passionate about, and I may do a video where I show you guys photos of black women from the 80s, like the image I put in the thumbnail. So if you guys want to also help the channel out, you can also donate to the Cash App, by clicking the link in the description box where you can send a donation to PayPal. It's all greatly appreciated and helps me be able to continue making more videos and live streams like this, because this was, again, a subject I was very passionate about, and I wanted to take brothers and sisters who weren't born in the 80s and the 90s and really get you guys to understand why Black men like myself love Black women. We love their natural beauty and we love their natural softness. And we want to see sisters go back to that natural softness and see that Black men love them for themselves. So I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. And again, I will thank you all for coming out tonight on Black Friday, or now Black Saturday. And I hope you'll be there for next week's stream. Have a good evening and have a good night.